When my wife passed away, her wealthy boss called me and said, "Hank, I found something. Come to my office right now." Then he added, "Don't tell your son or your daughter-in-law. You could be in grave danger." When I got there and saw who was standing in the doorway, my blood ran cold, and I realized my wife hadn't just died, she had been taken from me. But before I tell you what I found in that office, you need to understand how the day of her funeral became the day my own son declared war on me. My name is Hank, and I'm 72 years old. I spent 40 years managing logistics in a warehouse, and before that, I carried a rifle for this country. I know how to read the room, and I know when a storm is coming, but nothing prepared me for the storm that walked into our neighborhood church that humid Tuesday morning. I sat in the front pew, staring at the mahogany casket that held Martha. My Martha. We had been married for 45 years. She was a petite woman with hands hardened by work and a heart that could hold the world. For 3 decades, she had worked as the head housekeeper and personal assistant to Mr. Sterling, a man with more money than God, but who only trusted his life to one person, and that was my wife. The organ music was soft, a low hum vibrating in my chest. The church was filling up with neighbors, choir members, and even some of Mr. Sterling's staff. Everyone whispered in low, respectful tones. Everyone, except the 2 people who should have been sitting right next to me. My son Robert and his wife Vanessa arrived late. Not 5 minutes late, but 40 minutes late. The service had already begun when the heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary banged open. I didn't turn around, but I didn't have to. I heard the sharp click of high heels against the stone floor, echoing like gunshots in a library. Heads turned. I could feel the collective intake of breath from the congregation. I kept my eyes fixed on the flowers atop Martha's casket, white lilies, her favorites. Then I smelled them before I saw them. A cloud of expensive, cloying perfume that smelled of desperation and money, mixed with the stale scent of cigarettes. Robert slid into the pew beside me. He was wearing a shiny cream-colored suit that looked like something a pimp would wear to a nightclub, not a son at his mother's funeral. He didn't touch my shoulder, didn't squeeze my hand, didn't even look at the casket. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up the gloom of the church, illuminating his face. He was texting. His thumbs moved furiously, and his jaw was tight. I glanced sideways and saw sweat beading on his forehead. It wasn't from grief, it was the cold sweat of a cornered man. Vanessa squeezed in next to him. She was a woman from a middle-class suburb pretending she'd been born in a luxury penthouse. She wore huge black sunglasses inside the church and a dress that was too short and too tight for the occasion. She fanned herself with a funeral program, looking around with open disdain. "This place is a sauna," she whispered, loud enough for the choir to hear. "They don't have money for air conditioning?" "Shh," hissed Robert, but he didn't put away his phone. I gripped the handle of my cane. It was a sturdy piece of hickory I'd carved myself. My knuckles turned white. I wanted to tell them to leave. I wanted to tell them to show a little respect for the woman who had paid for Robert's college, who had paid for their wedding, who had bailed them out more times than I could count. But I said nothing. I am a man of discipline. I wouldn't cause a scene at Martha's farewell. The service ended, and we moved to the fellowship hall for the meal. The ladies of the church had prepared the food Martha loved: fried chicken, homemade casseroles, mac and cheese, and cornbread. The smell was comforting to everyone else, but it seemed to offend Vanessa. She stood near the wall holding a paper plate with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. I watched her from my seat in the corner. She leaned in close to Robert. "I have hearing aids that I keep tuned very high. Most people think I'm just a deaf old man, but I hear everything." "I can't believe we have to eat this grease," Vanessa hissed. "My stomach turns just looking at it. And look at these people. This is all so cheap. Where did all her money go, Robert?" "You said she had savings." "She spent it on pills," mumbled Robert, his mouth full of food he hadn't bothered to bless. "Well, at least that expense is gone," said Vanessa, and let out a cruel little laugh. "That's $400 a month back in our pockets." My heart stopped. Then it started beating again with a slow, heavy rhythm of pure rage. My wife hadn't even been underground for an hour, and they were celebrating the savings on her heart medication. I looked at my hands. They were trembling, not from age, but from the urge to wrap them around something. The room began to empty. Neighbors came by to shake my hand and offer their condolences. I nodded and thanked them, but my eyes never left my son. He was pacing back and forth by the exit, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Finally, when the last guest had gone, Robert walked toward me. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask if I needed a ride home. He stood over me, blocking the light. "Dad," he said in a flat voice, "where is the key to Mom's safe?" I looked up at him slowly. I saw the bags under his eyes, the tick in his cheek. This was my boy, the kid I taught to fish, the child Martha had rocked to sleep. Now he looked at me like I was an ATM that had swallowed his card. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice raspy. "The key to the safe," Robert repeated louder. "Vanessa says Mom had a life insurance policy. We need to go through the papers. We're entitled to 50% as next of kin." Vanessa stood beside him, crossing her arms. "We need to start the probate process immediately, Hank. Funerals are expensive, and we have bills. We know Martha hoarded cash in the house." I stood up. It took me a moment. My knees were stiff. I leaned on my cane and looked them both in the eye. I'm 6'2", even stooped by age. I towered over Vanessa. "Her body isn't even cold yet," I said in a low, dangerous voice. "And you people are asking for money." "It's not about money. It's about asset management," Robert snapped. "Don't be difficult, Dad. We know you don't know how to handle finances. You just worked in a warehouse. Mom handled everything. We're just trying to help." "Help," I scoffed. "You're trying to scavenge. There is no money for you, Robert. Not today." Robert took a step closer, invading my personal space. His eyes were wild. "Listen to me, old man. You don't know what's going on. This house is in trouble. Asterisk, we times are in trouble. If we don't find that money by the end of the week, things are going to get very bad." "What kind of bad?" I asked. "The kind where you end up on the street," Robert spat. "Now give me the key, or I'll turn this house upside down until I find it myself." He reached toward my pocket. I swatted his hand away with a speed that surprised us both. "Get your hand out of my face," I growled. Vanessa gasped. "You're senile," she shrieked. "You're losing your mind. We should have you committed for your own safety." "We'll discuss that later, Vanessa," Robert said, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. "Dad, you have until tonight. If I don't have that key, I'm calling social services. I'll tell them you're unfit to live alone. I'll sell this house with you inside it." He turned and stormed out. Vanessa shot me one last look of disgust before following him, her heels clicking like a countdown clock. I stood alone in the fellowship hall. The silence was deafening. My own son was desperate. I had seen that look before in the eyes of junkies and gamblers. He wasn't just greedy, he was afraid. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my chest pocket. I pulled it out. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it. The screen was cracked, but I could read the name clearly. Mr. Sterling, Martha's boss, the billionaire who hadn't left his estate in 5 years. Why was he calling me? I answered. "Hank." His voice wasn't the smooth, commanding baritone I remembered. It was rough, breathless. "Mr. Sterling," I began. "Listen to me, Hank," he interrupted. "I was going through the safe Martha kept here in my private office. She left something, a ledger and a recording." I frowned. "A recording? Hank, you have to come to my estate right now. Do not go home. Do not tell Robert. Do not tell that woman he married. If they know what I know, you won't survive the night." "What are you talking about, Mr. Sterling?" "They didn't just wait for her to die, Hank," Sterling whispered. "They helped her go." The room spun. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "Come to the service entrance," Sterling said. "The gate is open. I have someone here you need to see." I hung up the phone. The grief that had been weighing me down evaporated. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. I walked out of the church and climbed into my old 1990 Ford pickup. It was old and ugly, but the engine was strong, and in the glove compartment, wrapped in an oily rag, was my old service pistol. I checked the chamber loaded. I was no longer just a widower. I was a soldier entering enemy territory, and my son was the target. I told Robert I had to go see the pastor to settle the final bill for the service. It was a lie. But lies were the only currency my son understood. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, but before I could turn the handle, a manicured hand slapped the wood, blocking my path. It was Vanessa. She was still wearing that too-tight black dress, and her eyes were hidden behind those ridiculous sunglasses, even though we were in the hallway. She extended a palm, wiggling her fingers expectantly. "Where do you think you're going, Hank?" she asked, with a voice dripping with that fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "To pay the church," I said, keeping my voice flat. "You're not going anywhere without leaving the credit card," she said, stepping closer. "I need to go buy supplies for guests who might stop by later. We need wine, we need decent cheese. Not that garbage the church ladies served." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the way her eyes darted to my back pocket where my wallet was. She didn't want cheese. She wanted to go to the mall. She wanted a new handbag to match her funeral outfit. She wanted to swipe my card until the magnetic strip wore off, just like she had done to Martha for years. I reached into my pocket. Vanessa grinned, a greedy grimace that showed her teeth. I pulled out my wallet. Her hand twitched. I opened it and pulled out a single $1 bill. It was crumpled and worn, just like me. I dropped it from my fingers. It fluttered through the air and landed on the linoleum floor, right between her expensive heels. "Buy some crackers," I said. Her mouth fell open. She looked at the money, then at me, her face turning red. "Is this a joke?" she shrieked. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," I said, taking a step forward. She flinched. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw the fear. She stepped back, moving out of the way to let me pass, while her eyes remained glued to the dollar on the floor. She would pick it up. I knew she would. She would pick it up the moment the door closed, because greed has no pride. I walked out into the humid afternoon air and got into my Ford truck. The door creaked with a mournful sound as I pulled it shut. The cab smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. It was my sanctuary. The engine roared to life with a cough and a sputter, but settled into a steady rhythm. This truck was like me, ugly on the outside, but it never quit. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving my son and his wife to fight over the scraps in my house. As I drove down the street, the houses began to blur. I wasn't just driving to the other side of town, I was driving into the past. I thought about Martha. For 30 years, she had left our house at dawn and returned after dark. She took the bus to the north side, to the gated estates where the driveways were longer than our entire block. She scrubbed floors, polished silver, organized lives that weren't hers. To the world, she was just a housekeeper, an invisible servant, but Martha saw everything. She knew where the secrets were buried because she was the one dusting the closets. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles cracking. My son Robert thought I was just a tired old man who moved boxes in a warehouse. He forgot what I did before the warehouse. He forgot that my country sent me to a jungle on the other side of the world when I was just 18. You learn things in war. You learn that the quietest moments are the most dangerous. You learn to watch the grass for movement that shouldn't be there. You learn that when the enemy smiles, he's usually holding a knife behind his back. I had been watching Robert and Vanessa for months. I noticed the new watch Robert wore, which cost more than my truck. I noticed the way Vanessa stopped leaving receipts on the counter. I noticed the way Martha had become quiet in the weeks before she died, her eyes darting to the phone every time it rang. I had been trained to spot an ambush, but I never thought the enemy would be sleeping in the guest room. I merged onto the highway, the old Ford vibrating under my hands. I checked my mirrors constantly. Old habits die hard. No one was following me. Robert was too busy trying to find the safe key to notice I was gone. I took the exit toward the Mansion District. The air changed here. It smelled of freshly cut grass and old money. The fences grew taller, the gates became more elaborate. I pulled up to the massive iron gates of Mr. Sterling's estate. A security camera whirred and turned toward me. I rolled down the window. "Hank," I said. The gate clicked and opened silently. I drove up the winding paved driveway lined with oaks that were older than the country itself. My rusty truck looked like a stain on a white sheet against the pristine landscape. I parked next to a silver Rolls-Royce. The contrast would have made a lesser man feel small. It only made me feel focused. I got out and adjusted my suit jacket. It was a cheap suit bought at a department store 10 years ago, but I wore it with the posture of a man who answers to no one. The front door opened before I could knock. Mr. Sterling was there. He was 80 years old, confined to a wheelchair, his body withered by time and illness, but his eyes were as sharp as broken glass. He wore a velvet smoking jacket and a silk scarf. He didn't look at me like the help. He didn't look at me like a charity case. He looked at me like a man who was about to go into battle and was glad to see another soldier. "Hank," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "Mr. Sterling." I nodded. He extended a hand. It was thin and trembling, but his grip was surprisingly strong. We didn't shake hands like businessmen. We clasped hands like brothers. "I'm sorry about Martha," he said. "She was the finest woman I ever knew. Better than me. Better than all of us." "Thank you, sir," I said, my throat tight. "Come inside," Sterling said, turning his wheelchair. "We don't have much time. Your son will realize you're gone soon." I followed him into the foyer. The floors were marble. The ceilings soared 20 feet high. It was a palace, but it felt cold, empty. Martha had been the warmth in this house. Without her, it was just a museum. We passed the grand staircase, the formal dining room where a long table sat empty, and went down a hallway lined with portraits of dead ancestors who looked at me with disapproval. I stared back. I had buried more men than they had ever met. Sterling led me to his private study at the back of the house. It was a room I had never been in. The walls were lined with leather-bound books. The air smelled of cedar and brandy. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, blocking out the afternoon sun, leaving the room in shadow. But we weren't alone. Standing by the fireplace was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, wearing a trench coat that looked like it had seen better days. He had a scar running down his cheek and eyes that looked like they had seen the bottom of a bottle and the bottom of humanity. "Hank, this is Mr. Vance," Sterling said. "He's a private investigator. Martha hired him 2 months ago." My heart skipped a beat. Martha hired a private eye? Why? Vance nodded at me. He didn't smile. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. "Please, sit down," Sterling said, gesturing to a heavy leather chair. I felt like I was sitting in the electric chair, waiting for them to throw the switch. Sterling positioned himself behind the desk. He placed his hands on a stack of items in the center of the green blotter. There was a small black leather diary. I recognized it immediately. It was Martha's prayer journal. She took it everywhere. And next to it was a thick envelope full of photographs. "I found this in the safe Martha kept here," Sterling said softly. "She had her own combination. I never asked what was inside. I trusted her completely. But after she passed, I knew I had to look. I had to make sure her affairs were in order." He pushed the diary toward me. "Open it, Hank. Read the last entry." My hands shook as I reached for the book. The leather was warm, as if she had just been holding it. I opened it to the bookmark. The handwriting was hers, neat and curved, but the ink was shaky, as if she had been writing in a hurry or in fear. I read the words. Robert asked for money again. I told him no. He looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. He looked at me as if he hated me. I found the pills in his jacket pocket. Today they look like my heart medication, but they aren't. "I'm afraid, Hank. I'm afraid of our son. I stopped reading. The room seemed to tilt. I couldn't breathe. Mr. Vance spoke then, his voice gravelly. "Look at the photos, Mr. Hank." I reached for the envelope. I poured the contents onto the desk. Dozens of photos spilled out. They were grainy, taken with a long-range lens, but the subjects were clear. There was Robert. He was standing in an alley talking to a man with tattoos on his neck. He was handing him a thick wad of cash. There was another photo. Robert and Vanessa sitting in a car. Vanessa was laughing, holding a bottle of champagne. But the last photo made me freeze. It felt like a physical blow to the chest. It was taken through the kitchen window of my own house. It was taken 3 nights ago. The timestamp said 2 a.m. In the photo, Robert was standing at the kitchen counter. He was holding 2 orange prescription bottles. One was Martha's heart medication. The other had no label. He was pouring the pills from one bottle to the other. He was smiling. I stared at the image. My son, my own blood, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the child I had taught to tie his shoes, was switching the pills. "He killed her," I whispered. The words felt like gravel in my mouth. "He killed his own mother." Sterling leaned forward, his face grim. "He didn't just kill her, Hank. He executed her. And now he's coming for you." "Why?" I asked, looking up, my eyes burning but dry. "Why would he do this?" Sterling pointed to the diary again. "Turn the page, Hank. Look at what she was hiding from you. Look at what she was hiding from everyone. I turned the page, and there, taped into the book, was a bank statement. The balance wasn't a few $1,000s. It wasn't even $100,000. It was $3 million. My Martha, the housekeeper, the woman who clipped coupons and darned my socks, she was a millionaire. And Robert knew. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. He didn't kill her because he hated her. He killed her because he was greedy. He killed her for a payday. I stood up. The chair fell backward with a crash. "I'm going to kill him," I roared. I reached for the waistband of my back, where the cold steel of my pistol pressed against my spine. "I'm going to go back there and put a bullet in his head." "No!" shouted Sterling. His voice cracked like a whip. "If you kill him now, you go to prison, and he wins." Vance stepped forward, hands raised. "You'll rot in a cell, and Vanessa will spend that money on vacations and jewelry. Is that what Martha would want?" I looked at the picture of my son, the monster. "Then what do I do?" I asked, my voice breaking. "We trap him," Sterling said. His eyes were cold and hard. "We make him confess. We make him destroy himself. But to do that, you have to go back there." "Back?" I asked. "To that house? With him?" "Yes," said Sterling. "You have to go back. You have to play the grieving, confused old man. You have to make him believe he's won. You have to make him believe you are weak. Can you do that, Hank? Can you look the man who murdered your wife in the eye and pretend you know nothing?" I looked at the diary. I looked at the photos. I thought of Martha. I thought of the fear she must have felt in those last days. I took a deep breath. I adjusted my jacket. I picked up my cane. I was a soldier once. I know how to follow orders, and I know how to wait for the kill shot. "I'll do it," I said. Sterling nodded. "Good. Now listen carefully. This is what we're going to do." And as he laid out the plan, I felt the old soldier inside me waking up. My son thought he was a predator. He thought I was the prey. He was about to discover that he had walked into a lion's den. Sterling pushed the small black leather diary across the mahogany desk toward me. It smelled of lavender, the scent Martha always wore. My hands shook as I opened it. The handwriting was hers, those neat loops I'd known for 45 years, but the words were foreign to me. I began to read. Asterisk, March 12th. Mr. Sterling's investment portfolio is up 12% this quarter. My recommendations on the tech firms paid off. Asterisk, I stared at the page. Recommendations? My Martha? The woman who cut coupons for canned corn was giving investment advice to a billionaire? I looked at Sterling. He nodded. Martha wasn't just my housekeeper, Hank. She was my financial compass. She had a gift. She saw patterns in the market no one else saw. For 30 years, I paid her a commission on every successful trade. I turned the page. A bank statement was taped there. The balance took my breath away. $3,200,000. My wife was a millionaire. She had built a fortune in silence, scrubbing floors by day and studying markets by night. But as I turned the pages, the tone of the entries changed. The ink became jagged. Asterisk, January 4th. Found another withdrawal. $2,000. Signature looks like mine, but the loop on the E is wrong. It's Robert. I know it's him. Asterisk. Asterisk, February 10th. $5,000 this time. I confronted him. He denied it. He screamed at me. Said I owed him. Asterisk. I looked at the total loss calculated at the bottom of the page. $50,000 in 2 years. My son had been bleeding his mother dry while he drove a leased Mercedes and wore Italian suits. Shame burned in my chest, hotter than grief. She never told me. She carried this burden alone to protect me from the truth about our boy. She died trying to save our savings from his greed. Vance, the private investigator, stepped forward, his trench coat rustling. He placed a series of high-resolution photographs on the desk. They were taken with a night vision lens, grainy and green, but clear enough to stop my heart. Mr. Hank, look at the timestamp. 2:14 a.m. 3 days before your wife passed. The photo showed my kitchen. The plaid curtains Martha sewed herself were visible. And there was Robert. He was standing by the counter where Martha kept her daily pill organizer. In his hand, he held a small amber bottle. It looked identical to her heart medication, but in the next photo, he was pouring the contents of that bottle into her organizer and pocketing the real pills. Vance pointed a calloused finger at the image. We analyzed your curbside trash. The next morning, we found the bottle he threw out. It didn't contain beta blockers. It contained a concentrated stimulant, a high-grade amphetamine mix, dangerous enough to cause cardiac arrest in a healthy man, fatal for someone with your wife's condition. Sterling spoke, his voice like gravel. It wasn't a heart attack, Hank. It was murder. Calculated, cold-blooded murder. He waited until her prescription was low. Then he made the switch. He knew exactly what he was doing. He watched her take those pills. He watched her die, and he did it for money. He did it because she was about to cut him off. I looked at the picture of my son. His face was illuminated by the refrigerator light. He wasn't crying. He wasn't hesitating. He was smirking. The monster living in my house, the boy I taught to ride a bike, had poisoned the woman who gave him life because he wanted a payout. He traded his mother's life for a gambling debt. It wasn't natural causes, I whispered. It was an execution carried out in our own kitchen. A sound escaped my throat. It was a low, guttural roar of pure animal grief. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard the wood creaked, my vision blurred with red-hot tears. I stood up, kicking the heavy leather chair backward with a crash. I could feel the weight of the service pistol in my truck's glove box. It was calling to me. I needed it. I needed to feel the recoil. I needed to see the fear in his eyes that Martha must have felt. I'm going to kill him. The words tore from my throat, raw and bleeding. I'm going to drive back there and put him down like a rabid dog. He doesn't deserve to breathe. He doesn't deserve a trial. He took my Martha. He took my life. I turned toward the door, my hand reaching for the handle. I was no longer a father. I was an executioner. I could see it all in my mind. The kick to the door, the look on Vanessa's face, the final judgment delivered in lead. Immediate, permanent justice. My blood boiled, screaming for vengeance. Stop! Sterling's voice cracked through the air. He slammed his hand on the desk. Hank, stop! If you walk out that door with a gun, you lose everything. You go to prison for the rest of your life, and Robert wins. He becomes the victim. He inherits the house. He inherits the money. Vanessa spends every dime Martha saved while you rot in a cell. Is that what you want? Is that what Martha would want? I froze, my hand on the doorknob, my chest heaving. Vance stepped between me and the door. We don't have enough for a conviction yet, Hank. The bottle in the trash is circumstantial. The photos show him touching the pills, but not what was times and times them. A defense lawyer would tear it apart. We need more. We need him to say it. We need a confession. Sterling wheeled his chair closer, his eyes burning into mine. You have to go back there. You have to walk into that house, look the man who killed your wife in the eye, and smile. You have to play the part, Hank. Be the grieving, confused old man they think you are. Let them believe they've won. Let them get comfortable, because when they're comfortable, they make mistakes. And when they slip, we'll be there to catch them. Can you do that? I looked at the diary. I looked at the photos. I thought of Martha. I took a deep breath. I can be a soldier one last time, I said. I drove back to my house in my old Ford, and the steering wheel felt like it was made of ice under my grip. The engine hummed with a low, steady rhythm that usually calmed me, but today, it sounded like a funeral march. I checked my rearview mirror not to see the traffic behind me, but to look at my own face. Sterling had told me to play the part. He told me to be the grieving, confused old man my son thought I was. I tried to smile. I tried to cultivate a look of weakness and senility. But the face staring back was hard. The lines around my mouth were etched deep with a rage so potent it tasted like battery acid. I had to soften my eyes. I had to stoop my shoulders. I had to bury the soldier who wanted to strangle his enemy and resurrect the father who was lost in grief. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Harder than basic training, harder than the war. Because the enemy wasn't a stranger across a jungle clearing. The enemy was the boy I had taught to catch a baseball. The enemy was the man who had sat at my table and eaten my food while plotting my wife's murder. Every mile marker I passed felt like a step closer to hell. I could feel the bile rising in my throat. The sheer physical disgust of facing him was almost overwhelming. I wanted to turn the truck around. I wanted to keep driving until the gas ran out. But I couldn't. Martha needed me. Justice needed me. I pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. I sat there for a moment, breathing in the scent of stale tobacco and dust, gathering the strength to walk into the house that was no longer a home. I stepped onto the porch, and the front door was already ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from the violation of it. This was Martha's sanctuary. She kept it spotless. She kept it sacred. Now the door hung open like a broken jaw. I stepped into the foyer, and the sound hit me first. It was a tearing sound, wet and sharp like flesh being ripped from bone. I walked into the living room and stopped. The air was thick with dust and feathers. Vanessa was on her knees in the center of the room. In her hand, she held a yellow box cutter. She was attacking Martha's favorite floral sofa, the one she had saved for 3 years to buy. Vanessa was slicing the cushions open, one by one, plunging her hands into the stuffing and ripping it out in great white handfuls. She looked like a wild animal. Her hair was messy, her dress stained with dust, and she was muttering to herself, "Where is it? Where is the cash?" She didn't even see me. She tossed a cushion aside and stabbed the back of the sofa, slicing the fabric with a violent hiss. The floor was littered with papers, books pulled from shelves, and smashed knickknacks. It looked like a tornado had touched down inside my living room. But then I heard another sound coming from the hallway. A high-pitched mechanical whine. A drill. My stomach dropped. The master bedroom. Our bedroom. I walked down the hall, my cane tapping softly on the hardwood. The pictures on the walls were crooked. Our wedding photo lay on the floor, the glass shattered over Martha's smiling face. I stepped over it, careful not to crush her image. The whining sound grew louder, grinding against my nerves. I pushed open the bedroom door. The room was unrecognizable. The dresser drawers were pulled out and overturned on the bed. Martha's clothes, her Sunday dresses, her nightgowns were trampled underfoot. And there in the corner was Robert. He was sweating through his cream-colored suit. He was holding a high-powered electric drill, leaning his entire weight against the small wall safe Martha had hidden behind the painting of the Last Supper. The painting was thrown in the corner. Robert was grunting, his face twisted into a mask of pure greed. He leaned into the drill, the bit shrieking against the metal lock. Smoke rose from the friction, filling the room with the smell of burnt steel. He wasn't looking for documents. He wasn't looking for memories. He was looking for the payout he believed he was owed. I needed to get his attention. I needed to stop the desecration before I lost control and did something that ruined the plan. I let my body go limp. I allowed my knees to give slightly. I loosened my grip on my hickory cane and let it fall. It hit the floor with a loud clatter that cut through the noise of the drill like a gunshot. Robert jumped. The drill slipped, screeching across the metal door of the safe and gouging the wall. He spun around, eyes wide. His chest was heaving. His eyes were bloodshot and frantic. He looked at me, and for a second, he saw his father. He saw an intruder. He saw an obstacle. Then recognition dawned, but it brought no shame, only anger. He dropped the drill onto the pile of Martha's clothes. He pointed a shaking finger at the open safe. "It's empty," he screamed, his voice broken by hysteria. "Empty. There's nothing in here but dust. Where is it? Where is the money? Where are the bonds?" I stared at him, letting my mouth hang slightly open, feigning the confusion of a man whose world has stopped making sense. I leaned against the doorframe, clutching my chest as if my heart were failing. I didn't speak. I just looked at the safe empty. Then back to him, letting the silence stretch, letting his panic grow. He kicked the bed frame hard. "Don't look at me like that, old man," he shouted. "You knew, didn't you? Did you know she moved it? You and she were always whispering, always hiding things from me." Robert marched across the room, closing the distance between us in 3 long strides. He was big, he'd played football in high school, and he used that size now to intimidate. He grabbed the front of my jacket, bunching the cheap fabric in his fist, and slammed me against the doorframe. His face was inches from mine. I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath, mixed with the acrid scent of his fear. He reached down and picked up the power drill again. He revved it once, the sound sharp and threatening right next to my ear. He held the spinning bit inches from my face. The metal blurred into a gray spiral of potential violence. "Tell me," he hissed, spittle landing on my cheek. "Tell me where the old witch hid the money, or I swear to God I will drill the answer out of your skull. Speak, old man, where is the inheritance?" The drill bit whirred inches from my nose, a blur of gray steel smelling of ozone and violence. Robert was breathing heavily, his eyes wide with a madness that had consumed him entirely. I felt the heat radiating from the motor against my cheek. My heart was already hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of adrenaline and fear, but I knew I had to weaponize it. Sterling's words echoed in my mind, clear and commanding. Asterisk, buy time, Hank. Play the victim. Don't let him kill you before we have the proof. Asterisk. I looked into my son's eyes and saw no recognition there, only the cold stare of a stranger who wanted something I possessed. He screamed again, demanding the location of money that didn't exist in that safe. I knew if I stayed standing, he would use that drill. He was past the point of reason. I let my eyelids flutter. I allowed my jaw to go slack. I raised a trembling hand and clutched the fabric of my shirt right over my heart. I forced the air out of my lungs in a ragged, wheezing gasp that sounded like an engine dying. My knees gave way for real this time as I let gravity take me. I slid down the doorframe, my back scraping against the wood until I hit the floor with a heavy thud. I curled in on myself, groaning low in my throat, my hand clawing at the carpet. It wasn't entirely acting. The stress, the grief, the sheer physical threat had spiked my blood pressure to dangerous levels. I could feel the room spinning. Robert recoiled, the drill still whirring in his hand, his expression shifting from aggression to sudden panic. He wasn't worried about losing his father, he was worried about losing the combination to the safe. He backed away, the tool powering down with a mechanical whine, leaving a ringing silence in the room broken only by my desperate, staged gasps for air. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, hair wild, her black funeral dress covered in white feathers from the decimated sofa. She took one look at me writhing on the floor and dropped the box cutter she'd been using to eviscerate my furniture. Her face paled not from concern, but from calculation. "Don't let him die!" she shrieked, rushing forward and grabbing Robert's arm with a grip that looked painful. "If he dies now, we lose everything, Robert. He's the only one who knows where the assets are. If he kicks the bucket, that money disappears into the system." "Think, you idiot!" Robert looked at me, then at the drill in his hand. He cursed loudly and threw the tool onto the bed, where it landed on Martha's Sunday hat. He dropped to his knees beside me, grabbing my collar with both hands and shaking me violently. His head jerked back and forth. "Wake up, old man," he shouted, spit flying onto my face. "You aren't dying yet. Not until you tell me where the money is." He raised his hand and slapped me hard across the face. The sting was sharp and hot, but I kept my eyes half closed, focusing on my breathing, making it shallow and irregular. I let my head loll to the side. I needed to give them a number big enough to blind them, a number big enough to make them keep me alive. I licked my dry lips and whispered, "The trust." Robert froze. He leaned closer, his ear almost touching my mouth. "What trust? Say it again." I gasped, forcing the words out between wheezes. "The trust fund," Martha set it up. $3 million. The lawyer, coming next week. I let my head drop back against the floorboards, as if the effort of speaking had drained the last of my life force. Through slit eyes, I watched Robert look at Vanessa. A slow, greedy smile spread across her face, erasing the panic. She whispered, tasting the weight of the words. 3 million. The number hung in the air like a spell. It was enough to fix his gambling debts, enough to buy Vanessa's silence, enough to fuel their delusions for a lifetime. I saw the transformation in my son. The killer faded, replaced by the opportunist. He no longer saw a dying father. He saw a winning lottery ticket that needed to be kept safe until cashing day. He grabbed me under the arms and hauled me up. It wasn't gentle. He dragged me toward the bed, kicking Martha's clothes out of the way. He tossed me onto the mattress, my body bouncing on the springs. He stood over me, panting, his eyes bright with a feverish light. "We have to keep him alive," Vanessa said, pacing the room. "Just until next week, just until the lawyer comes and we can get him to sign. We need to make sure he doesn't talk to anyone else." Robert nodded. He reached into my jacket pocket. I tensed, but I didn't resist. He pulled out my smartphone, a new model Martha had bought me for my birthday so I could see pictures of the grandkids. He looked at it, then at me. "You won't be needing this," he said. "You need rest, Dad. Lots of rest." He slid the phone into his own pocket, severing my lifeline to the outside world. He walked backward out of the room, his eyes never leaving mine. He looked like a zookeeper locking a dangerous animal in its cage. Vanessa followed him, shooting me one last suspicious glance before disappearing into the hall. The door slammed shut, the heavy thud vibrated through the floorboards. Then came the sound that sealed my fate, the metallic slide of the deadbolt, the sharp click of the lock engaging. I was a prisoner in the house I had paid for with 40 years of sweat. I lay still on the bed, listening to their retreating footsteps down the hall, listening to them whisper about millions that didn't exist, planning a future they would never see. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the silence to settle before I dared to move. They thought they had taken my phone. They thought they had isolated me. They didn't know about the loose floorboard under the bed, or what was hidden beneath it. 2 days passed in that stifling room, and the air grew heavy with the smell of my own sweat and Martha's lingering perfume still clinging to the curtains. The sun crept across the floorboards, marking time like a prisoner scratching tally marks on a wall. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the world go on without me. The neighbor walked his dog, and the mailman delivered bills. None of them knew that inside the yellow house, an old man was rotting in captivity. Twice a day, the lock clicked, and the door opened just a crack. Vanessa would slide a plastic plate across the floor with her foot, as if she were feeding a stray dog. The first meal was a sandwich made with bread that bloomed with green mold on the crust. The cheese was hard and sweating oil. The water was lukewarm tap water in a dirty glass. "Eat up, old man," she sneered through the crack. "We're cutting costs until the trust fund clears." I looked at the food, and my stomach churned. Every instinct screamed to throw it back at her, to starve rather than accept her insults. But I was a soldier. Soldiers don't starve for pride. Soldiers eat what they can find to keep the machine running. I picked off the mold with shaking fingers. I ate the dry bread. I drank the water. I needed my strength. I did push-ups against the wall when they were asleep. I paced the room to keep the blood flowing in my legs. I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing. I was sharpening my mind and body for the moment the door opened wide. Night fell like a heavy blanket, suffocating the house. The structure settled into silence, but it was an uneasy, quiet, full of the creaks and groans of old wood. I pressed my ear against the doorwood. The house was old, built in the 20s, and the vents carried sound like a telephone wire. I heard heavy footsteps pacing in the living room, back and forth, the sound of a trapped animal pacing its cage. Then, the ring of a cell phone shattered the silence. Robert answered on the first ring. His voice was low, but desperation made it carry through the walls. I strained to listen, deciphering the words through the wood. "Please, listen to me, Mick." I heard him beg. "I have the money on the way. It's a trust fund. My mother left it." "No, don't send anyone to the house. I swear on my life I'll have it." There was a pause, a long, terrifying silence where I could almost hear the voice on the other end dictating a death sentence. Then Robert spoke again, his voice cracking with tears. $500,000 is a lot of cash to move in 2 days. I need more time. Just give me a week, please. Mick, I lost it on the spread, but I can make it back. Don't touch my legs." I heard a sob, a grown man crying to a gangster. I understood then. It wasn't just greed, it was survival. My son had lost $500,000 betting on football games he didn't understand. He was in deep with the kind of men who didn't send overdue notices. They sent men with baseball bats and pliers. The deadline was in 3 days. If he didn't pay, he was a dead man, and I was his collateral. He needed those millions not to buy a yacht, but to buy his life. He was going to squeeze me until I signed, or until I died, because he had a gun to his head. I slid down the door until I hit the floor. My son wasn't just a murderer, he was a desperate fool. And desperate fools are the most dangerous creatures on earth. I waited until I heard Robert pass out on the couch, the clink of a bottle against a glass telling me he was drinking to drown his terror. I crawled toward the bed. Martha had been a brilliant woman. She anticipated storms before the first cloud appeared. Years ago, when Robert started stealing small amounts, she hired a carpenter to install a false bottom in the floorboard under her side of the bed. She told me it was for jewelry. I knew it was for emergencies. I pushed the heavy mattress aside with a grunt. My muscles burned, but I ignored the pain. I found the loose board and pried it up with the handle of a metal spoon I had hidden from my dinner tray. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay my salvation. A fully charged, powered-off brick-style Nokia phone, and next to it, the cold, heavy weight of a snub-nosed .38 caliber revolver. I checked the cylinder 5 rounds. Enough to end this, but Sterling was right. I needed justice, not just blood. I turned on the phone. The screen glowed green in the dark. I typed a text to the number Sterling had given me, using a simple code we agreed upon. *Wolf is at the door. Debt is $500K. Deadline 3 days. Need extraction. I waited. The minutes ticked by like hours. I watched the battery indicator, watched the signal bars, then the phone buzzed against my palm. A single text message read, Lawyer Sullivan arrives at 0900 hours tomorrow. He has the paperwork. Be ready to play your part. Do not break character. We are coming for you. I turned off the phone and hid it back under the floorboard. I slid the gun under my pillow, lay back in the dark, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, the curtain would rise. I closed my eyes and practiced my tremors. Tomorrow I would be the frail old man they wanted to see. But inside, I was already squeezing the trigger. The sun rose like a judgment I wasn't ready to face, but the click of the deadbolt told me the show had begun. The door swung open, and for the first time in 2 days, I wasn't greeted with a sneer or a kick. Vanessa was there, holding a steaming mug of coffee, her face plastered with a smile that looked like it hurt. "Good morning, Dad," she chirped, her voice an octave higher than usual. "We have a guest. You need to be presentable." She handed me the mug. It said Times World's Best Grandpa Times on the side. The irony tasted bitter, but I drank the coffee because I needed the caffeine to sharpen my senses. Robert appeared behind her, wearing a fresh suit and a tie that was too tight. He looked like a man trying to sell a car with no engine. He grabbed my arm, not to hurt me this time, but to steady me. "Easy, old man," he said loud enough for neighbors to hear. "Let's get you to the living room. Mr. Sullivan is here." They walked me down the hall like I was a piece of fragile china they were afraid to drop. I leaned heavily on my cane, shuffling my feet, playing the role of the confused invalid to perfection. In the living room sat a man who looked like he could foreclose on your house just by looking at it. Attorney Sullivan wasn't a big man, but he occupied all the space in the room. He wore a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my first house, and his eyes were black marbles behind rimless glasses. He didn't stand up when I entered. He just watched me like a hawk tracking a field mouse. "Mr. Hank," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "I'm Sullivan. I represent your late wife's estate. Please, sit." Robert guided me to the armchair, the one Vanessa hadn't shredded yet. He sat next to me, perched on the edge of the cushion, his knee bouncing with a nervous energy that shook the floorboards. Vanessa perched on the arm of his chair, playing the devoted daughter-in-law. We were a picture-perfect family if you ignored the smell of desperation and the gun hidden under my mattress. Sullivan opened a leather briefcase and pulled out a single thick document bound in blue paper. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Robert, then at me. "Mrs. Martha was a very prudent woman," he began. "She established a living trust 3 years ago. The assets within that trust, including the investment portfolio and offshore accounts, total approximately $3 million. Robert made a noise in his throat like an engine dying. His eyes bulged. $3 million. He looked at Vanessa, and I saw the greed wash over them, erasing the fear for a split second. Sullivan continued, ignoring my son's reaction. "Per the terms of the trust, upon her death, the entirety of the estate transfers to her husband, Hank." Robert nodded eagerly, reaching out to pat my shoulder. "That's right," he said, his palms sweating against my jacket. "Dad is the beneficiary. We're just here to help him manage it." Sullivan held up a hand, stopping him. "There is a condition, Mr. Robert." Martha was very specific. She included a competency clause. Due to the significant value of the assets, the beneficiary must be certified competent and of sound mind by a medical professional before he can access a single penny or sign checks. Robert froze. His hand stopped patting my shoulder. Sullivan leaned forward, dropping his voice an octave. "If the beneficiary is found to be incompetent, senile, or unable to make rational decisions, the trust locks automatically." The assets are frozen and placed into a high-yield holding account for a period of 10 years to ensure their protection. During that time, no one, not even family members or legal guardians, can access the principal amount. 10 years. The words hung in the air like smoke. I saw the blood drain from Robert's face. He didn't have 10 years. He didn't have 10 days. He had Mick and the guys with baseball bats waiting for him. He needed that money today. The trap Sterling and I had built was simple. We knew they wanted to declare me incompetent to steal the money, so we made competency the key to the vault. Vanessa apparently didn't understand the gravity of the timeline. She was still sticking to the original script, the one where they threw me in a home and went shopping. She let out a dramatic sigh and shook her head sadly. "Oh, Mr. Sullivan, that's a shame," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We've been so worried about Hank lately. He's been forgetting things, leaving the stove on, talking to people who aren't there. Just yesterday, he didn't even know where he was. I don't think he can pass a competency test. It might be better for everyone if we just accept that the trust needs to be frozen. Or maybe you can transfer guardianship to Robert." She looked at Sullivan, expecting him to nod sympathetically. Instead, Sullivan started closing the folder. "I see," he said, reaching for the clasp. "If that's the case, I'll have to file the paperwork to lock the assets immediately. It's for his own protection, of course. We can review the trust status in a decade." The lock clicked shut. The sound was like a gunshot to Robert. He jumped out of his chair, knocking Vanessa sideways. "No," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Shut up, Vanessa. You don't know what you're talking about." He turned to Sullivan, his hands waving frantically. "She's exaggerating. Dad is fine. He's just grieving. Look at him. He's sharp as a tack, remembers everything. Don't you, Dad?" He grabbed my shoulder again, digging his fingers in hard enough to bruise. "Tell him, Dad. Tell him you're fine. Tell him you're not crazy." I looked at my son. I saw the sweat running down his temple. I saw the terror in his eyes. He was begging me to be sane so he could rob me. It was pathetic. I looked at Sullivan and blinked slowly. "I feel fine," I said, my voice shaky but clear. "I just miss my Martha." Sullivan looked at me, then at Robert, then back at the file. He drummed his fingers on the leather case, considering. "Very well," he said. "If you insist he is competent, we can proceed. But I need proof. I can't release $3 million on just his word." He pulled a card from his pocket. "I've scheduled a comprehensive medical evaluation for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. It's with an independent doctor. If Mr. Hank passes, he gets the checkbook. If he fails, the vault closes for 10 years. Do we have an understanding?" Robert let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Yes," he said, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "Yes, we understand. Dad will be there. He'll pass, I promise." Sullivan stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Good day, gentlemen." He walked out the door, leaving a silence behind him that was charged with menace. Robert turned to me. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, dark resolve. He smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf looking at a lamb. "You're going to be the healthiest man in the world tomorrow, Dad," he whispered. "I'm going to make sure of it." Night fell over the house like a shroud, and the air inside grew thick with the smell of pot roast and impending violence. For the first time in the 10 years she had lived under my roof, Vanessa was cooking. She wasn't heating up takeout. She wasn't throwing frozen nuggets into the microwave. She was actually cooking. The aroma of stew and potatoes filled the kitchen, masking the scent of bleach she had used to scrub the floor earlier. It was a performance, a domestic scene set for an audience of one, me. Robert sat at the kitchen table, drumming his fingers on the wood. His leg bounced up and down, a nervous tic he had developed since the phone call with Mick. He watched me like a hawk watches a dying rabbit. I sat in my usual spot, my hands folded over the head of my cane, trying to look frail, trying to look like I wasn't calculating the distance to the back door. Vanessa hummed as she moved around the stove. It was a cheerful tune that sounded grotesque in the silence of the house. She wore an apron over her designer clothes, playing the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law. "Dinner is almost ready, Dad," she chirped, turning to flash me a smile that showed too many teeth. "We made your favorite, pot roast with extra gravy. We need you strong for tomorrow. You have to pass that test with flying colors so we can fix this trust and take care of you properly." I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes dull. Thank you, Vanessa, I mumbled. That's very kind of you. It's the least we can do, she said, turning back to the counter. We just want you to be happy. We want you to be comfortable. I watched her back. I watched the way her shoulders tensed. I knew that posture. It was the posture of a soldier planting a mine. I shifted in my chair, angling my body toward the dark window that faced the backyard. Outside, it was pitch black. The glass had become a mirror, reflecting the kitchen behind me with perfect clarity. I didn't look at Vanessa directly. I looked at her ghost in the glass. She thought I was staring at my own reflection, lost in the dementia she claimed I had. But I was watching her hands. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small white paper packet. It looked like the kind of envelope a corner dealer hands you through a car window. She glanced over her shoulder at me. I let my jaw hang slack and stared blankly at the window. She turned back to the stove, satisfied I was mentally gone. In the reflection, I saw her tear the packet open. She poured it over the bowl of soup she had set aside for me. A fine white powder cascaded into the dark broth, dissolving instantly. She stirred it vigorously, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. 1 stir, 2 stirs, 3. Mixing death into dinner. She wasn't just seasoning my food, she was drugging it. I remembered the conversation I had overheard. Asterisk. We change his meds. We tell him he did things he didn't do. Asterisk. But this was different. They needed me lucid for the doctor tomorrow, didn't they? Or maybe not. Maybe the plan had changed. Maybe they realized I was too much of a risk. Maybe they planned to drag a drugged, drooling version of me to a crooked doctor who would sign anything for cash. Or maybe they just wanted to ensure I slept through the night so I couldn't escape. Whatever was in that bowl, I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't a vitamin. She took the bowl and turned around, her face composed into a mask of maternal care. Here you go, Dad, she said, setting the steaming bowl in front of me. Eat while it's hot. The gravy will do you good. I looked down at the brown liquid. It smelled savory, salty, and lethal. I looked at Robert. He was watching me intensely, his eyes fixed on the spoon in my hand. Eat up, Dad, he urged, his voice tight. You need the nutrition. I picked up the spoon. My hand shook. I let the tremor get worse, shaking the utensil until it rattled against the bowl. I lifted a spoonful toward my mouth. Robert leaned forward, holding his breath. Vanessa wiped her hands on her apron, waiting. I brought the spoon to my lips, then let a violent spasm take over my arm. I jerked my hand to the side. The spoon hit the edge of the bowl hard. Whoops, I whispered. I swept my arm across the table in a clumsy arc, knocking the bowl completely over. It flew off the edge of the table and shattered on the linoleum floor. Soup splattered everywhere, covering the cabinets, the chair legs, and my shoes in a hot, sticky mess. Oh no, I cried, my voice cracking. I'm so clumsy. I'm so sorry. Vanessa shrieked, jumping back to avoid the splash. Stupid old man, she yelled, forgetting her role for a second. Look what you did. Robert stood up, his face red. It's fine, he said through gritted teeth, forcing himself to stay calm. It was an accident. Vanessa, clean it up. We'll get him another bowl. But before Vanessa could move, a low, guttural sound came from under the table. It was Princess, Vanessa's prize-winning English bulldog. The dog waddled out from the living room, attracted by the smell of meat. Princess, no! Vanessa screamed, reaching for the dog's collar. But the dog was fast for a creature that weighed 50 pounds. She lunged for the puddle of gravy, lapping it up with greedy, enthusiastic noises. She licked the floor tiles clean, ingesting the powder, the secret ingredient, all within seconds. Get away from there! Vanessa yelled, kicking at the dog. It was too late. The bowl was licked clean. I watched the dog. Robert watched the dog. Vanessa stood frozen, a roll of paper towels in her hand, her eyes wide with horror. For a moment, nothing happened. Princess looked up, licking her chops, wagging her stump of a tail, waiting for more. Then she sneezed. It started as a sneeze, then a cough, then a sharp wheeze. The dog's legs went stiff. She fell onto her side, kicking the air as if she were running in a dream. White and pink foam bubbled from her jowls. Her eyes rolled back. Vanessa fell to her knees, screaming the dog's name. She tried to hold the animal, but Princess was thrashing violently, her claws scratching the linoleum. 1 minute passed. The thrashing slowed. 2 minutes. The wheezing turned into a gurgle. 3 minutes. The dog went rigid one last time, arching her back, and then went limp. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Princess lay dead on the kitchen floor, her tongue lolling out among the shards of the broken bowl. I looked at the dead animal. Then I looked at my son. "What happened to the dog, Robert?" I asked, my voice trembling with a fear I didn't have to fake. "Why did she die?" Robert stared at the dog, his face draining of color until he looked like a corpse himself. He looked at the empty packet peeking out of Vanessa's apron pocket, then back at the dead animal. He swallowed hard. "She had a cold," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "She was sick. It was just a seizure, Dad. Just a cold." He lied. I knew he lied. And looking into his terrified eyes, I knew times he times knew times I times knew. That soup wasn't meant to help me sleep. It wasn't meant to make me compliant. It was meant to stop my heart. The sun rose gray and sickly over the city, matching the feeling in the pit of my stomach. I had survived the night by pushing a heavy dresser in front of my bedroom door and sleeping with one eye open, my hand under the pillow gripping the steel of my revolver. But the morning brought a new danger. Robert pounded on my door at 7 o'clock. His voice was taut with forced cheer that sounded like a violin string about to snap. "Get dressed, Dad," he shouted through the wood. "We have that appointment." I moved the dresser slowly, making enough noise to sound like an old man struggling. I opened the door and saw him. He looked worse than I did. His eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled of mints trying to cover the scent of last night's whiskey. He marched me out to his car, a luxury sedan lease that was 2 months behind on payments. I sat in the passenger seat, gripping my cane, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood fade away. I expected us to turn toward downtown, toward the hospital district where real doctors practiced. But Robert turned left, toward the industrial park, toward the part of town where the streetlights were broken and the storefronts were boarded up with plywood. "Where are we going, son?" I asked, my voice quivering just the right amount. "The hospital is the other way." Robert gripped the wheel so hard the leather creaked. "We're seeing a specialist, Dad," he said, his eyes fixed on the road. "Private practitioner. He's the best. He'll get you that certificate in no time." I looked out the window at the graffiti-stained walls and the piles of trash on the curb. A specialist. Right. A specialist in back-alley abortions and no-questions-asked stitches. We pulled up to a brick building that looked like it had been condemned 10 years ago. There was no sign, just a metal door with peeling green paint. Robert rushed me out of the car, looking over his shoulder as if he expected the devil himself to be following us. We went inside. The waiting room smelled of mold and stale cigarette smoke. There were no magazines, no receptionist, just a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like a dying fly. A door opened, and a man stepped out. He wore a white coat, but it was stained yellow at the cuffs. He was short, balding, and sweating profusely despite the chill in the room. I recognized him not as a doctor, but from the photos Vance had shown me. This was Dr. Morris, a disgraced veterinarian who had lost his license for selling ketamine to local dealers. He was Robert's poker buddy. "Ah, Mr. Hank," Morris said, wiping his damp hands on his coat. "Please, come in. We have everything ready." I shuffled into the exam room. It was filthy. The exam table was covered in a sheet that looked like it hadn't been changed in a week. There were no diplomas on the wall, just a calendar from an auto parts store. "Sit," Morris said, pointing to the table. Robert stood by the door, blocking the exit, arms crossed. I sat, the paper crinkling loudly under my weight. Morris moved to a metal tray. I saw a syringe. It was already filled with a clear liquid. It was a large dose. Too large for a B12 shot. Too large for anything meant to heal. I watched him tap the barrel, flicking air bubbles to the top. The liquid swirled, viscous and deadly. "What's that?" I asked, eyes wide with feigned fear. "Just a vitamin cocktail," Morris said, his voice shaking slightly. "Perk you right up, get the blood flowing for the lawyer, helps with memory." Robert nodded from the door. "Take it, Dad. It's for your own good." I looked at the needle. Then I looked at Morris. I saw the tremors in his hands. I saw the way he licked his lips. He was terrified. He wasn't a killer. He was a desperate man, doing a favor for a desperate friend. But a needle in the arm is just as deadly as a bullet in the brain. That liquid wasn't vitamins. It was likely an adrenaline and digitalis cocktail, enough to simulate a heart attack in an old man with high blood pressure. It was the backup plan. Since the dog ate the soup, they decided to inject the poison directly. Morris stepped toward me, needle raised. "Roll up your sleeve, Mr. Hank," he said. I looked at Robert. He was watching with a hunger that made my skin crawl. He wanted this over. He wanted his inheritance. I started to unbutton my cuffs slowly. My movements were agonizingly slow. Morris shifted his weight impatiently. Come on," he muttered. I rolled up my sleeve, exposing the thin skin of my inner arm. Morris leaned in. He smelled of fear and antiseptic. He grabbed my arm to steady it. I let him find the vein. I let the needle tip hover millimeters from my skin. Then I moved. Not with violence, but with intimacy. I leaned forward until my face was inches from his ear. I grabbed his wrist with my free hand. My grip wasn't the grip of a frail old man. It was the grip of a man who had moved boxes for 40 years. Morris froze. His eyes widened, meeting mine. "Doc," I whispered, my voice low and steady, completely devoid of the senile tremor I'd been faking. "Before you push that plunger, you should know something. I sent a GPS drop to my fishing buddy about 20 minutes ago. He gets worried when I go to bad neighborhoods." Morris frowned, confused. "Your fishing buddy?" "Yeah," I said, tightening my grip on his wrist until I felt his bones creak. "His name is Sheriff Patterson. He's on his way here right now to have a cup of coffee with us. And he's bringing the drug dogs." The color drained from Morris's face so fast I thought he might faint. The needle slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the metal tray. He yanked his arm back, breaking my grip, and stumbled away from me, crashing into a cabinet of glass jars. "Sheriff?" he squeaked. "You called the sheriff?" He turned to Robert, eyes wild. "You said he was senile," he screamed. "You said he didn't know what day it was. He knows the sheriff. Robert, you brought a man who's friends with the cops to my clinic. Are you trying to get me killed?" Robert stared from me to Morris, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "He's lying," he shouted. "He doesn't know how to use a smartphone. I took it from him." I smiled, a cold, hard smile. "I have more than one phone, son." Morris grabbed Robert by his jacket lapels and shoved him toward the door. "Get out!" he screamed. "Get him out of here right now. I'm not going to jail for you. Take your dad and your debts and get lost before the cops show up." He threw open the back door of the clinic and practically tossed us into the alleyway. "Out!" he yelled again, slamming the heavy metal door and bolting it with a resounding thud. We stood in the trash-strewn alley, the sound of distant sirens playing tricks on Robert's mind. He looked at me, and for the first time, he saw something other than a victim. He saw a threat, but he was too deep in his own delusion to see the full picture. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep hard. He dragged me toward the car, his breathing ragged and heavy. He threw me into the passenger seat and slammed the door so hard the car shook. He stomped around to the driver's side and got in, pounding the steering wheel with his fists. Once, twice, 3 times. He screamed a wordless sound of pure frustration. Then he turned to me. His face was twisted, his eyes burning with a hatred that had no bottom. "Fine," he hissed, starting the engine and peeling out of the alley. "You want to play games, old man? You want to be difficult? We tried to do this the easy way. We tried to be nice. But you leave me no choice. Tonight, you sign those papers. I don't care if I have to break every finger on your hand to make you hold the pen. We're doing this the hard way." We drove back to my house in a silence that felt heavier than the humid air outside. Robert drove with white knuckles on the wheel, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, as if expecting the sheriff to materialize from the asphalt. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the familiar neighborhood pass by the oaks I had planted 30 years ago, the mailboxes I knew by name. We turned the corner onto my street, and my stomach dropped. There, in the middle of my front yard, staked right into the heart of Martha's prize hydrangea bushes, was a sign. It was red, bright, and aggressive. Asterisk, asterisk, for sale by owner. Cash only, asterisk, asterisk. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the driveway. There was a sensible silver minivan parked there. Standing on the porch was a young, white couple, holding hands, looking up at the eaves of my house. They looked hopeful. They looked innocent. And standing in front of them, blocking the door to my sanctuary, was a real estate agent I didn't recognize. No, wait, it wasn't an agent. It was Vanessa. She was wearing a floral dress and holding a clipboard, pointing at the roof and smiling that shark smile. Robert didn't even slow down until we were right on top of them. He swerved onto the lawn, leaving deep black tire marks in the green grass Martha had tended so carefully. The disrespect took my breath away. They weren't just killing me. They were erasing me. They were selling the walls that held my memories before my body was even cold. I got out of the car, and the humidity hit me. But it was Vanessa's voice that made me sweat. She was talking loud and fast, her voice pitching up in that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Oh yes," she was saying. "It has great bones. Needs some TLC, but it's full of charm. We're letting it go for a steal because we need a quick closing." The young husband looked at the peeling paint on the porch railing. "Why is the price so low?" he asked. "It seems too good to be true." Vanessa let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Well, to be honest," she said, leaning in confidentially, "my father-in-law is moving into a specialized memory care facility next week. It's very sad. He's actually become quite unmanageable, even dangerous. We need the cash to pay for his treatment. We already have a bed waiting for him. We just need a cash deposit today to hand over the keys on Monday." I stood by the car door, shaking. Not from age, from a rage so pure it felt like fire in my veins. She was selling my life. She was selling the room where I held Martha when she cried. She was selling the kitchen where we danced on Sundays. And she was doing it for a cash deposit she would probably spend on a handbag before the sun went down. The young woman looked sympathetic. "Oh, that's terrible," she said. "We can write a check for $5,000 today. Is that enough to hold it?" Vanessa's eyes lit up like neon signs. "That would be perfect," she cooed. "Just make it out to Times Cash **. Speeds up the paperwork." I buttoned my cheap suit jacket, I adjusted my tie, I gripped my cane not for support, but as a weapon of truth. I walked across the lawn, my boots crunching on the grass my son had just ruined. Robert tried to grab my elbow, hissing at me to get inside, but I shook him off with a strength that startled him. I walked straight up to the young couple. I didn't look like a senile old man. I looked like a man who had run a warehouse floor for 40 years. I looked them straight in the eye. "Don't write that check, son," I said, my voice booming across the yard. The husband froze, his pen hovering over the checkbook. He looked at me, then at Vanessa. "Why not?" he asked. "Because this house isn't for sale," I said, my voice steady and hard. "And even if it were, you wouldn't want it. The foundation is eaten by termites. The whole thing is held together by prayers and cheap paint. And you should know about the kitchen. My son just killed the family dog in there yesterday because it had rabies. Blood is still under the refrigerator." I pointed at Robert with my cane. "He's not grieving. He's scrubbing a crime scene." The color drained from the young woman's face. She looked at the house as if it were haunted. She grabbed her husband's arm. "We're leaving," she whispered. The husband didn't argue. He shoved the checkbook into his pocket, and they ran for their minivan. They backed out of the driveway faster than Robert had pulled in. Vanessa screamed. It was a primal sound of pure fury. She flew off the porch, her carefully constructed mask shattering. "You ruined it!" she shrieked, her fingers curling into claws. "You ruin everything, you useless old leech!" She lunged at me, scratching at my face, drawing blood on my cheek. Robert stepped in and slapped her hard. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "Shut up," he yelled. "Get inside before the neighbors call the cops." He grabbed me by the shirt front and pulled me close, his breath hot and reeking of fear. "You pushed me too far, old man," he hissed. "Games are over. Tonight you sign those papers, or you're going to meet Mom a lot sooner than you planned." The sun set, but the heat stayed trapped inside the house like a fever. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of cheap whiskey and terror. Robert didn't bother locking me in the bedroom anymore. He sat in the middle of the living room in my favorite armchair, the one Vanessa hadn't destroyed yet. Across his lap lay a .22 gauge shotgun. It was old, rusted on the barrel, something he'd picked up at a pawn shop years ago for hunting trips he never took. He was cleaning it, running an oily rag over the stock with slow, deliberate movements. The sound of metal on cloth was the only noise in the room. a rhythmic whisper of violence. He wasn't looking at me. He just stared at the wall, eyes glazed and distant. He had stopped pretending. The mask of the grieving son, the concerned caretaker, it was all gone. What was left was a man backed into a corner, a man who saw no way out but through me. I sat on the edge of my bed in the darkened room down the hall. The door was open enough to see the sliver of light from the hallway. I could hear Vanessa moving around in the dining room. The sound of packing tape being ripped from the roll was sharp and loud in the quiet house. Asterisk. Rip. Smooth. Rip. Smooth. Asterisk. She was packing. Not clothes, not keepsakes. She was packing the silver. She was taking down the oil paintings Martha had collected for 30 years. She was wrapping the flat-screen TV in bubble wrap. She was murmuring to herself a stream of curses and calculations under her breath. She wasn't planning to stay to care for a senile father-in-law. She was liquidating. She was getting ready to run the moment the money hit the account. She would leave Robert to deal with the mess, to deal with the body. I knew her type. She was a survivor, a parasite that would detach and find a new host the moment the current one went cold. She didn't care about Robert, didn't care about the debt. She just wanted her cut before the ship went down. The phone rang, not the house phone. It was Robert's cell, sitting on the coffee table next to a half-empty bottle of whiskey. The ringtone was loud, jarring in the tense silence. Robert didn't answer immediately. He let it ring. 1, 2, 3 times. Then he picked it up, his hand shaking slightly. He put it on speakerphone, maybe out of habit, maybe because he wanted me to hear, so I would know why he was about to do what he was about to do. "Mick," he said, his voice cracking. "Please. I just need a few more hours." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and terrifying. "Robert," the voice said, "you're out of hours. My associates are on the way. They have instructions. If the money isn't in the account by 9 a.m., they start with your knees, then work their way up. Do you understand?" The line clicked dead. Robert stared at the phone. He took a long pull from the whiskey bottle, the amber liquid spilling down his chin. He wiped it with the back of his hand. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. He stood up, the shotgun clutched in his hand. He swayed slightly, the alcohol and terror mixing into a dangerous cocktail. He looked down the hallway, straight at my door. I heard his heavy, uneven footsteps on the floorboards. He was coming. I reached under the mattress, my fingers brushing the cold steel of my own revolver, but I didn't pull it out. Not yet. I needed him close. I needed him to commit. The door to my room flew open, banging against the wall with a force that cracked the plaster. Robert stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light. He looked like a monster from a child's nightmare. In one hand, he held the shotgun, the barrel leveled at my chest. In the other, he crumbled a piece of paper. It was the power of attorney form Attorney Sullivan had left. "Sign it," he rasped, his voice sounding like grinding gravel. "Sign it now, old man, or I swear to God I will paint this room with your—" The shotgun barrel looked like a tunnel to the afterlife. It was dark and smelled of gun oil and old rust. I looked right down the center of it. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. It was the rhythm of a man who had made peace with death a long time ago in a jungle far from here. Robert was shaking. The tremors started in his hands and worked their way up his arms until his whole body was vibrating with whiskey and adrenaline. He looked pathetic. He looked dangerous. He looked like a stranger wearing my son's face. The paper crunched in his fist. "Sign it!" he screamed again. "Sign the paper and I'll let you live. I'll put you in a home. You'll be safe. Just sign the damn paper." I looked from the gun to his eyes. They were wet, swimming in tears and rage. He was falling apart at the seams. I knew I had to push him. I needed him to say it. I needed the recording device hidden under the floorboard to catch every syllable of his sin. I leaned back on the mattress, resting my weight on my elbows. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning a hole in my soul for 3 days. "Why did you kill your mother, Robert? Why did you murder the woman who gave you life?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. Robert flinched as if I had slapped him. The shotgun dipped for a second, then snapped back up. "Shut up!" he hissed. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know about the pills," I said, my voice quiet and low. "I know you switched them. I know you watched her die. Why, son? Was the money worth it?" Robert let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He lowered the gun slightly, pacing the small room like a caged tiger. "You want to know why?" he screamed. "You really want to know?" Because she was a miser. She was sitting on time's millions asterisk dad. Millions. And she watched me drown. She watched me struggle to pay my rent. She watched me borrow from Mick. She knew I was in debt. She knew I was scared. And what did she do? She lectured me. She told me I needed to be responsible. She told me she was going to cut me off. He stopped pacing and leveled the gun at my face again. His expression was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She found out about the gambling. She found my ledger. She said she was going to change the trust. She said she was going to leave it all to charity. Can you believe that? She was going to give my inheritance to strangers while her own son got his knees broken by loan sharks. She was selfish, Dad. She was cruel. He took a swig from the whiskey bottle he had dragged in with him, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. "I didn't want to hurt her," he slurred, the alcohol loosening his tongue just like we hoped. "I just needed time. I needed the money. It was easy, you know? She was old. Her heart was weak. All I did was give her a little push. I swapped the beta blockers for stimulants. It wasn't poison. It was just medicine. If she was stronger, she would have survived. It's her fault for being weak. It's her fault for being stingy. She forced my hand. She made me do it. I heard every word. I etched them into my memory. He was blaming her. He was blaming the victim for his own crime. He was a coward, a greedy, entitled coward who thought the world owed him a living. He didn't see a mother. He saw a bank account. He didn't see murder. He saw a transaction. He threw the paper onto the bed next to me. He tossed a cheap ballpoint pen beside it. "Enough talk," he growled. "I'm done explaining myself to you. Mick is coming at 9. I need this signed and notarized by my contact before he gets here. Sign it, old man. Sign it, or I swear I'll pull this trigger and tell the cops it was suicide. I'll tell them you couldn't live without Mom. It'll be poetic." I looked at the paper. It was the power of attorney document giving Robert full control over all my assets and future assets. It was the key to the kingdom he thought he had won. I looked at the pen. It was a blue Bic with a chewed cap. I reached out and picked it up. My hand didn't shake. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it, the final move. I sat up slowly, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. Robert stepped back, keeping the gun leveled at my chest. "That's it," he said, his voice trembling with anticipation. "Just sign the line at the bottom, then it's all over." I placed the paper on the nightstand. I smoothed out the wrinkles he had made. I clicked the pen. I looked at him one last time. I wanted to remember this moment. I wanted to remember the look of triumph in his eyes before I destroyed him. I didn't sign my name. I didn't write Times Hank asterisk. I pressed the tip of the pen into the paper hard enough to tear the fiber. I wrote 4 words in large, block letters. Asterisk, asterisk. "I know what you did." Asterisk, asterisk. I put the pen down. I picked up the paper. I stood up. I held it up so he could see. Robert squinted in the dim light. He leaned forward, lowering the shotgun slightly. He read the words. His lips moved silently, forming the shapes. "I know what you did." He froze. The triumph vanished from his face, replaced instantly by a look of absolute confusion and then dawning horror. He looked at the paper, then at my eyes. He saw the soldier there. He saw the man who had hunted him. He realized in that split second that I wasn't senile. I wasn't confused. I wasn't a victim. He realized he had confessed to a sane man. A guttural roar of rage erupted from his throat. He raised the shotgun, aiming it straight at my head. His finger tightened on the trigger. The metal clicked as he took up the slack. I stared down the black hole of the barrel, and I didn't blink. Then the world exploded. There was a deafening crash from the front of the house, the sound of heavy wood splintering and metal hinges being ripped from the frame. It sounded like a bomb going off. The front door had been breached. Robert flinched, turning his head toward the hallway. Beams of blinding white light cut through the darkness of the house, slicing into the bedroom like lasers. A voice amplified by a megaphone boomed through the shattered door, shaking the walls. "Police, drop the weapon. Drop it now. We have the house surrounded." Robert looked back at me, eyes wide with the realization that his time had run out. but he didn't drop the gun. Panic set in. He grabbed me by the collar and hauled me up, using my body as a shield against the inevitable justice coming down the hall. The room exploded with light that was brighter than the sun. And it wasn't just the hallway anymore. Beams cut through the bedroom windows, shattering the glass with the sheer intensity of the sound waves from the bullhorn. "This is the police. We have the house surrounded. Drop the weapon and come out with your hands up." The voice was like God's, shaking the floorboards and rattling the pictures on the walls. I saw dust motes dancing in the light beams like spirits disturbed from their rest. Robert tightened his grip on my shirt, squeezing until I thought the cheap fabric would tear off my back. He looked around wildly, a trapped animal realizing the cage had no door and the hunter was already inside. The shotgun wavered in his hand, and for a second, I thought he might drop it. I thought he might surrender and end this nightmare with some shred of dignity. But desperation does strange things to a man. It turns fear into aggression and panic into violence. He didn't drop the gun. Instead, he screamed a raw, primal sound of denial that tore at his throat. He wasn't ready to give up his inheritance. He wasn't ready to face the consequences of his sins. The light blinded us both, turning the room into a high-contrast nightmare of shadows and glare. I squinted against the brightness, my heart beating a war drum in my chest. This was it. The cavalry had arrived, and Sterling had kept his promise. But now I was in the line of fire, and the bullet was already in the chamber. I heard a commotion from the back of the house, a sudden crash, and the sound of screaming. It was Vanessa. I could picture it perfectly. She had probably grabbed the bag of silver and bolted for the kitchen door the moment the first siren wailed, because she was a survivor, a rat leaving the sinking ship before the water touched her toes. But she didn't make it far. I heard her scream, a high-pitched shriek of indignation and terror that cut through the noise of the sirens. Then came a voice I recognized, and it wasn't a cop. It was Mr. Sterling. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Vanessa?" His voice boomed, magnified by the silence between the sirens. "I believe the police have some questions about a poisoned dog and a forged check." She was trapped. Sterling had his private security team covering the exits the police missed. There was no way out. Robert heard it too. He heard his wife being cornered. He heard his world collapsing around him. He looked at me, and his eyes were void of anything human. They were black pits of panic. He spun me around, slamming my back against his chest, hooking his arm around my neck, cutting off my air. He jammed the shotgun barrel against my temple, and the metal was hot now, warmed by his feverish grip. "Back off!" he screamed at the empty doorway, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I'll kill him. I swear I'll kill him. Back off, or I blow his head off." He dragged me toward the hallway, using my body as a shield, my feet scuffing on the carpet. I smelled his pungent, sour sweat. I felt his heart hammering against my back, a frantic, erratic rhythm. He was strong with the strength of the insane, pushing me toward the living room, toward the lights, thinking he could negotiate his way out of a murder charge. "I want a car," he screamed at the windows. "I want a clear path or the old man dies." He forgot who he was holding. He forgot that before I was a warehouse manager, before I was a husband, I was a sergeant in a platoon that saw things no man should see. He thought he was holding a victim. He was wrong. We stepped into the blinding white light of the living room, and the glare hit Robert full in the face. He blinked, momentarily disoriented, his grip loosening just a fraction as he tried to shield his eyes from the assault. That was the mistake. That was the opening I had been waiting for. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just reacted. Muscle memory buried under 40 years of peace surged to the surface, instant and lethal. I dropped my weight, making myself suddenly heavy as lead. As he stumbled forward to compensate, I drove my right elbow backward with every ounce of strength I possessed. It connected perfectly with his solar plexus, a solid impact of meat on bone. I felt the air leave his lungs in a wet times whoosh asterisk. He doubled over the shotgun barrel, bowing toward the floor. I spun, grabbing the barrel with my left hand and his wrist with my right. I twisted with a violent torque. A sharp times, snap times echoed as his finger broke inside the trigger guard. He screamed in pain. I ripped the weapon from his hands and swept his legs with a kick that would have shattered a younger man's knee. He hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of him. Robert lay on the floor gasping for air, clutching his broken hand, his face a mask of agony and shock. I stood over him. The shotgun felt natural in my hands. heavy and familiar, like an old friend returning. I pumped the action, ejecting a shell that spun through the air in slow motion and clattered onto the hardwood. I leveled the barrel at his forehead. He looked up at me, and for the first time, he saw the truth. He saw the father who had protected him, and the soldier who could end him. I tightened my finger on the trigger. The rage was a roaring fire demanding blood. Then, the front door exploded inward with a shower of splinters. Men in tactical gear swarmed the room, weapons raised. "Mr. Hank, don't shoot!" a voice yelled. "Drop the weapon! Mr. Hank, don't do it!" The fluorescent lights of the precinct hummed with a low electric buzz that drilled into my skull, but it was nothing compared to the silence on the other side of the glass. I sat in the observation room, my hands resting on my cane, watching my son through the one-way mirror. Robert was handcuffed to the metal table. His right hand was splinted and bandaged where I had broken his finger, a stark white reminder of our struggle. He looked small in that chair. The expensive suit was rumpled and stained with sweat and dust. He was leaning forward, talking to the detective with a frantic energy that reeked of desperation. I could hear every word through the speaker system. He was admitting to the assault. He admitted to threatening me with the shotgun. He called it a breakdown. He called it a moment of grief-induced insanity. But when the detective asked about Martha, he shut down. He shook his head violently, denying everything. "My mother died of a heart attack," he insisted, his voice rising in pitch. "She was old. Her heart was weak. I loved her. I would never hurt her. You have nothing on me," hearsay. "That's all." Nothing. I watched him lie. I watched the boy I had raised, the man I had protected, twist the truth until it broke. He thought he was smart. He thought without a body, without a weapon, he could talk his way out of a murder charge. He thought the threats in the house were just words against words. He didn't know about the floorboard. He didn't know about the technology from a bygone era that had been recording his every breath. The door to the interrogation room opened, and the air in the observation booth seemed to grow colder. Attorney Sullivan walked in. He didn't look like a lawyer right then. He looked like an executioner in a three-piece suit. He carried no briefcase. He held no files. In his hand, he carried a single object, my old brick Nokia phone. It was scratched and worn, a relic of a time when phones were tools, not toys. Robert squinted at it, confused. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I want my lawyer." Sullivan didn't answer. He didn't sit. He walked to the table and placed the phone in the center of the metal surface. The device looked out of place, like a stone on a dinner plate. Sullivan pressed a button. The screen glowed a dull green. He looked at Robert, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker in my son's eyes, a primal realization that the trap had snapped shut. Sullivan pressed play. The audio was tinny but crystal clear in the acoustic-tiled room. My voice came first, calm and steady, asking the question that had started it all. Asterisk. "Why did you kill your mother, Robert?" Asterisk. Then came the silence. And then Robert's voice filled the room. It was the voice of the man in the bedroom, the voice of the monster. Asterisk. "Because she was a miser. She was sitting on millions, Dad." She forced my hand. I swapped the beta blockers for stimulants. It wasn't poison. It was just medicine. If she was stronger, she would have survived. Asterisk. Robert stopped breathing. He stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the table. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray and ashen. The recording continued to play his justification, his blame, his confession. Every word was a nail in his coffin. He slumped in his chair, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. He looked at the mirror. He looked right at where I was sitting. He couldn't see me, but he knew I was there. He knew I had played him. He knew the senile old man he tried to rob had been 2 steps ahead of him the whole time. Sullivan stopped the recording. He didn't say a word. He simply picked up the phone, turned, and walked out of the room, leaving Robert alone with the echo of his own sins. My son put his head on the table and began to sob. It wasn't the cry of a remorseful man. It was the cry of a man who realized his life was over. The door to the observation room opened, and Detective Reynolds walked in. He looked tired, but satisfied. He held a file in his hand. He nodded toward the glass where Robert was now rocking back and forth. "We got him, Mr. Hank," he said quietly. That recording is admissible, proves premeditation, proves motive. But that's not all. He opened the file and placed a transcript on the console in front of me. We've been questioning your daughter-in-law in the next room. She didn't hold up as well as he did. The minute we told her we had the tape of Robert, she broke. She's singing like a canary to save her own skin. Confessed to everything, Mr. Hank, admitted to opening credit cards in your name, admitted to identity theft, admitted to poisoning the dog to test the powder. And most importantly, she gave a sworn statement that she witnessed Robert dumping the real heart meds and replacing them with the stimulants. Said he bragged about it. Said he called it the perfect crime. I looked at the transcript. Vanessa's words were there in black and white, confirming every horror I had suspected. She was throwing him to the wolves to cut a deal. There was no loyalty among thieves. There was no love in that house, just greed and survival. I felt a heavy weight settle on my chest. It was the finality of it all. My family was gone. My wife was murdered. My son was a killer. My daughter-in-law was an accomplice. I was the last one standing in the ruins of the family legacy. Detective Reynolds cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He closed the file and looked me in the eye. There's one more thing, Mr. Hank, he said, his voice grave. The recording and the testimony are strong. But to secure a first-degree murder conviction beyond a reasonable doubt, we need physical evidence. We need to prove the stimulants were in her system. We need to prove it wasn't a natural heart attack. I knew what was coming. I had known it since the moment Sterling showed me the photos, but hearing it aloud didn't make it easier. We need to exhume Martha's body, Reynolds said softly. We need to run a toxicology screen. I know it's asking a lot. I know you just buried her. But we need your permission to bring her back up. I looked through the glass at my son. He was broken, defeated, but he was still alive. Martha was in the cold ground because of him. She didn't get to say goodbye. She didn't get to see Paris. She died scared and betrayed in her own kitchen. If bringing her back meant keeping him locked away, then it was what I had to do. I gripped my cane. I thought of the woman who had stood by me for 45 years. I thought of the justice she deserved. Do it, I said, my voice hard as stone. Dig her up, find the poison, and bury him with it. The morning they dug up my wife, the sky was the color of a bruise. I stood at the edge of the cemetery plot, leaning heavily on my cane as the machinery roared. It was an unholy sound, a backhoe tearing at the earth where I had laid her to rest only a week before. Every scoop of dirt felt like a physical blow to my own body. I had spent 45 years protecting Martha. I walked on the street side of the sidewalk. I checked the locks at night. I made sure her car had oil. My only job was to keep her safe. And I had failed. I let a wolf live in our house. And now I was failing her again by disturbing her peace. I watched the metal teeth of the bucket bite into the soil, and I had to close my eyes. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Mr. Sterling. He was sitting in his wheelchair beside me, face pale but eyes steady. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell me it was going to be okay. He just sat there, bearing witness to the horror, because he loved her too. We waited in the cold morning air until the casket was raised. It looked wrong in the daylight, muddy and scarred. They loaded it into a white van without ceremony. I followed that van to the medical examiner's office, driving my truck with a numbness that spread from my fingers to my heart. We sat in a sterile waiting room that smelled of floor wax and formaldehyde. The hours dragged like years. I stared at a crack in the linoleum, trying not to imagine what was happening behind the double doors, trying not to think about the scalpel, trying not to think about my Martha being opened up again. Sterling read a newspaper, but he never turned the page. We were two old men keeping a vigil for a woman who deserved better than this. I thought about Robert sitting in a holding cell. I hoped he was cold. I hoped he was scared. I hoped he knew that every second the clock ticked, the noose was tightening. Detective Reynolds pushed through the double doors at 2 p.m. He held a clipboard against his chest, and his face was grim. He didn't look like a man bearing good news, but he looked like a man holding answers. He sat across from us and placed a clear plastic evidence bag on the table. Inside was a printout of a toxicology graph. Lines spiked high, sharp red peaks on a white grid. "We have the results," Reynolds said, his voice low and professional. The medical examiner found massive concentrations of ephedrine and caffeine in her blood work, along with traces of a synthetic amphetamine usually found in diet pills from the 90s. It wasn't a natural heart attack, Mr. Hank. Her heart didn't fail, it exploded. The dosage was 10 times the safe limit for a healthy adult. For a woman with her condition, it was a death sentence within an hour of ingestion. I stared at the graph. It was just ink on paper, but it represented the moment my wife died. I could see it. I could see her taking her morning pills, trusting them to keep her alive. I could see her feeling the racing pulse, the panic, the tightness in her chest. I could see her reaching for the phone that Robert had likely unplugged. Reynolds tapped the paper. We ran a comparison against the residue found in the bottle your investigator pulled from the trash. It's a match, a perfect chemical match. We also found traces of the same substance on the upholstery of your son's car. He must have spilled some when he was mixing it. It's conclusive. We have the weapon, we have opportunity, we have motive, and thanks to your recording, we have the confession. The numbness in my body evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard weight of finality. It was real. Not a suspicion, not a nightmare. My son murdered my wife. He poisoned her. He watched her die. And he did it for money he owed to thugs. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. Just one. I wiped it away angrily. I looked at Sterling. He nodded slowly. His eyes were wet too. "We got him, Hank," he whispered. "We caught the bastard." By 5 o'clock, the district attorney had filed the paperwork. The charges were read aloud in the precinct briefing room, and I listened to every word. Robert was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, grand larceny, and fraud. The list went on a litany of sins that would bury him for the rest of his natural life. Vanessa was charged as an accomplice to murder, conspiracy, and fraud. The judge denied bail immediately. They were considered flight risks. They were considered dangers to society. They were remanded to the county jail until trial. I saw them on the news that night. They were doing the perp walk for the cameras. Robert wore an orange jumpsuit that clashed with his pale, terrified skin. He looked at the cameras, and for a split second, he looked right at me through the screen. He didn't look arrogant anymore. He looked like a child who realized the dark was real. Vanessa was crying, hiding her face with her hands. Her hair was a mess. Her designer life was over. They were going to die in prison. It was justice. But it didn't bring Martha back. It didn't fill the empty side of the bed. It just closed the book on the ugliest chapter of my life. I sat in the station waiting room, feeling empty. The adrenaline was gone, leaving me hollow. I was an old man, with no wife and no son. I was alone. Attorney Sullivan walked in. He looked fresh despite the long day. He carried a thick manila envelope under his arm. He sat next to me. "Mr. Hank," he said softly, "the legal matter of the criminal case is now in the hands of the state, but there is still the matter of the estate." I looked at him wearily. "I don't care about the money, Sullivan. Burn it. Give it away. I don't want a dime of the money that killed her." Sullivan shook his head. "You need to see this." He opened the envelope and pulled out a document bound in blue paper. The will we showed Robert was a draft. It was a decoy designed to flush him out. Martha wrote another one, a final one. She wrote it the day she hired the investigator. She knew. Hank. She knew it might come to this. She left instructions that it was only to be revealed once the threat was neutralized. He placed the document in my hands. It was heavy. "Read it, Hank. Read what she really wanted." I opened the blue legal folder Sullivan placed in my hands, and the paper inside felt heavier than a Bible. It wasn't the cold, typed text of a standard will. The first page was a handwritten letter on the cream-colored stationery Martha kept in her vanity drawer for special occasions. I recognized the slant of her penmanship immediately, the way she crossed her T's with a little flourish. I traced the ink with my thumb, feeling the texture of the woman I had lost. My throat closed up so tight it hurt to swallow. I began to read, and it was like hearing her voice in the quiet room, a whisper from the grave that was both comforting and terrifying. "Asterisk, my dearest Hank." Asterisk, she wrote. Asterisk, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it likely means I didn't go peacefully. I kept secrets from you, my love. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to protect you. I wanted you to live a simple life. a life without the burden of wealth and the vultures it attracts. Asterisk. Asterisk. But I failed, Hank. I failed because the vulture was already in our nest. I watched our son Robert change over the years. I watched him go from a sweet boy to a man consumed by envy and greed. I saw the way he looked at us, not with love, but with calculation. I found his betting slips. I found the forged checks. The fruit has rotted on the vine, Hank, and I fear the rot has reached the core. Asterisk. Asterisk. I hid the money to keep him from destroying himself, but now I fear he will destroy us to get to it. If I die under suspicious circumstances, do not trust him. Do not mourn me yet. Go to Mr. Sterling. He holds the key to everything. He is the only one I trust to help you navigate the storm that will follow my death. Asterisk. Asterisk. I love you, Hank. You were my soldier in life, and I know you will be my soldier after I am gone. Fight for us. Fight for the truth. Asterisk. I lowered the letter. A single tear escaped my eye and landed on the paper, blurring the word Times Soldier asterisk. She knew. She had lived in terror in her own home, watching her son turn into a monster, and she had faced it with a quiet dignity that broke my heart. She had prepared for her own murder because she knew Robert better than I did. She knew he was capable of the unthinkable. I looked at Sullivan. He was watching me with a solemn expression, hands clasped on the table. She was an extraordinary woman, Mr. Hank, he said softly. She came to me 6 months ago to draft this. She was very specific about her wishes. She wanted to make sure that no matter what happened, justice was served. Sullivan turned the page to the formal legal document. This is Martha's last will and testament, he announced, his voice shifting to a professional cadence. It supersedes all previous documents, including the draft we showed your son. Article 1. Regarding the disposition of assets to immediate family. To my son, Robert, I leave the sum of $1. I stared at the document. It wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate, calculated insult. In the eyes of the law, leaving him nothing might allow him to argue he was forgotten by mistake. Leaving him $1 meant she remembered him. She considered him, and she decided that was exactly what he was worth. It was a final slap from the grave, a message that she saw him exactly for what he was. Article 2, Sullivan continued. To my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, I leave absolutely nothing. I leave her with the knowledge that her greed yielded no reward. Article 3. Regarding the residual estate. To my husband, Hank, I leave the entirety of my real and personal property. This includes the primary residence, the contents of all safety deposit boxes, the investment portfolio managed by Sterling Industries, and the liquid assets held in the offshore trust, totaling $3,200,000. $3,200,000. The number was staggering. It was a fortune that could have bought us a life of luxury. We could have traveled. We could have bought a cottage by the ocean. We could have lived like kings. Instead, we lived in a drafty house with a son who plotted our demise because we were too afraid to show our hand. The money didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like blood money. It felt like the price of my wife's life. I looked at the numbers on the page, and all I could see was the bottle of poison. All I could see was Robert's face as he watched her die. Mr. Hank, Sullivan said, snapping me out of my thoughts. The assets are yours. Already transferred to your name. You can do whatever you want with them. You can buy a yacht. You can burn it. It's yours. I stood up and walked to the window of the precinct. Outside, the city moved on. People walked their dogs, drove to work, lived lives that hadn't been shattered by betrayal. I thought about the house. I thought about the kitchen where Princess died. I thought about the bedroom where Robert held a shotgun to my head. I thought about the living room where Vanessa shredded the sofa. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene. It was a mausoleum of bad memories and spilled blood. I couldn't go back there. I couldn't sleep in that bed. I couldn't eat in that kitchen. The walls had absorbed the hate and the fear, and no amount of paint would ever cover it. Sell it, I said, not turning around. Sell the house. I don't care what you get for it. Just get rid of it. I never want to step foot inside that place again. Sell the furniture. Sell the car. Sell everything that reminds me of them. And the money? Sullivan asked. What do you want to do with the $3 million? I turned to face him. I thought about the letters I had received during my live stream. I thought about the thousands of seniors sitting in their paid-off homes, afraid of their own children. I thought about the people who didn't have a Mr. Sterling to watch their backs. I don't want it, I said firmly. I have my pension. I have my truck. That's enough for me. But I'm not going to burn it. Martha worked too hard for it. She earned every penny. We're going to use it to fight. I want to start a foundation, Sullivan. The Martha Foundation. I want to hire lawyers for elderly people who are being abused by their families. I want to hire private investigators to expose greedy children waiting for their inheritance. I want to pay for safe housing for seniors who need to escape. I want every dime of that $3 million to be used to stop people like Robert. Sullivan smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. That is a noble legacy, Mr. Hank. Martha would be proud. I'll draw up the paperwork immediately. I walked out of the station with the folder under my arm. I had one last thing to do. One last loose end to tie up before I could truly be free. I climbed into my truck and drove, not toward the city, but toward the highway, toward the state correctional facility. The road was long and straight, and the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and violent orange. I pulled up to the prison gate. The barbed wire glinted in the dying light. I showed my ID. I passed through the metal detectors. I walked down the long gray corridor that smelled of bleach and misery. I sat in the visitation booth on the secure side of the glass. I waited. 5 minutes later, the door on the other side buzzed open. A guard let him in. Robert was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. He had lost 20 pounds. His head was shaved. His eyes were hollow, sunk deep into his skull. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and fallen in. He sat down and picked up the handset. His hand was trembling. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Dad, you came." I picked up the phone. I looked at him. I didn't see my son. I didn't see the baby I held. I saw a stranger. "I came to give you something," I said. I held up the blue folder. I pressed the page against the glass. "Read it, Robert, Article 1. He squinted. He read the line. Asterisk. "To my son, Robert, I leave the sum of $1 US. Asterisk." He started to cry. Great, heaving sobs that shook his whole body. He pressed his forehead against the glass. "Dad, please," he begged. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please help me. I'm scared." I watched him cry. I felt nothing. The well was dry. I stood up. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, crisp $1 bill. I slid it through the slot in the metal tray. "Here is your inheritance, son," I said. "Don't spend it all in one place." I hung up the phone. I turned my back on his weeping face. I walked out of the prison into the cool night air. I took a deep breath. For the first time in months, my lungs filled completely. I was alone, but I was free. The glass partition in the prison visitation room was smeared with fingerprints and the grease of 1,000 desperate foreheads. But through it, I saw my son clearer than I ever had in my life. Robert was clutching the single dollar bill I had slid through the tray like it was a life raft. His tears had stopped leaving tracks through the grime on his face. Now his eyes were wide with a frantic panic. He pressed his face close to the glass, his breath fogging the surface. "Dad, listen to me," he pleaded, his voice tinny through the handset. "You have to help me with a lawyer. The public defender is useless. He says I'm looking at life without parole. You have the money now. You have millions. Just get me a good attorney. We can fight this. We can say it was an accident. We can say I was under duress. Please, Dad, you can't let your own son rot in here." I stared at him. I looked at the man who had poisoned his mother. I looked at the man who had held a shotgun to my head. I looked for a spark of the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. I looked for the teenager I taught to drive. I looked for the young man I stood beside at the altar. They were all gone, consumed by the creature sitting in front of me. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a bailout. He was still trying to con me. He still thought I was the easy mark. I leaned forward. My voice was calm, devoid of the rage that had fueled me for weeks. "I'm not your dad," I said simply. "Your father died that night in the bedroom. He died when you pointed a loaded gun at his chest. He died when you decided a gambling debt was worth more than his life. The man sitting here is just a witness to your crimes." Robert recoiled as if I had hit him. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at the dollar bill in his hand, then back at me. The hatred started to replace the fear in his eyes, a pure, venomous hate. "I hope you die alone," he spat. "I hope you rot with that money." "I already died alone, Robert," I replied. "I died the night I realized I raised a murderer. But I came back, and now I'm going to live." I hung up the phone. It clicked into the cradle with a sound of finality that echoed in my bones. I didn't look back. I stood up and walked out of the booth, leaving him screaming silent curses behind the soundproof glass. I walked down the long, gray corridor, past the guards, past the gates, and out into the world. I took a gulp of air that tasted like rain and gasoline and freedom. It was finished. The book was closed. 1 year later, the air tasted of roasted chestnuts and expensive perfume. The River Seine flowed beneath me, dark and silky, reflecting the lights of a city that burned with a golden fire. I stood on the deck of a private riverboat, the wind ruffling the hem of my cashmere coat. I was 73, but I felt younger than I had at 50. I wasn't wearing my old warehouse uniform. I was wearing a navy suit tailored in London. My shoes were Italian leather. My cane was polished ebony with a silver handle. I looked like a man who owned the world, or at least a significant part of it. Paris. Martha had talked about Paris for 40 years. She had magazine clippings of the Eiffel Tower taped inside her pantry door. She watched old French movies on Sunday afternoons, whispering, "I get it." She saved her pennies in a jar, marked Times Paris Fund *, but the jar was always emptied for braces, for tuition, for bail money. She never made it. She spent her life serving others, cleaning their messes, making their lives beautiful while hers remained small. But she was here now. I felt her in the breeze. I felt her in the warmth of the setting sun. I looked at the architecture, the bridges, the lovers walking hand in hand along the quay. It was everything she had imagined, and more. I wasn't just seeing it for myself. I was seeing it for Times Us *. The Martha Foundation was thriving back home. We had saved 16 elderly people from abusive situations in the first 6 months. We had put 3 corrupt guardians in jail. We had recovered $5 million in stolen assets. Every victory was a tribute to her. Every person we saved was a slap in the face to men like Robert. I had turned her tragedy into a crusade. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a warrior. I turned to the man sitting in a comfortable chair nearby. Mr. Sterling raised a glass of vintage Bordeaux. He looked healthier than he had in years, the fresh air doing him good. He had become more than a boss, more than an ally. He was my brother in arms. We fished together on weekends. We argued about baseball. We shared the silence of men who knew the cost of peace. "Ready, Hank?" he asked softly. I nodded. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat and pulled out a small velvet bag. It didn't contain much, just a handful of ashes. The rest of her rested in a beautiful mausoleum back home. But this part belonged to the world. I walked to the railing. The water lapped gently against the hull of the boat. I opened the bag. I didn't say a prayer. I didn't make a speech. Martha didn't need speeches. She knew what was in my heart. I tilted the bag. The gray dust caught the wind, swirling for a moment in the golden light before settling onto the surface of the river. It drifted away, carried by the current toward the sea, toward adventure, toward eternity. "Go see the world, my love," I whispered. "You earned it." I watched until the last speck disappeared into the dark water. A profound sense of lightness washed over me. The knot of grief that had lived in my chest for a year finally loosened. She wasn't gone. She was just everywhere. I turned back to Sterling. He handed me a glass of wine. The crystal clinked as we touched glasses, a sound of celebration, not mourning. "To Martha," Sterling said.